Yep, the glasses are back. The reason for that, we are talking Pride and Prejudice today with stick figures. Open a book and experience the world like you never have before. Hello everyone, welcome back to Open a Book. This is part 2 of my series on Pride and Prejudice, and as you can see, I am just about halfway through the book. I'm a little bit more than halfway through. As you can see, I got a lot of my tags. I am not writing in my book, y'all. Seriously, not gonna do it. And that's going to make my best friend Anne very happy because she's going to be borrowing the book afterwards, and she's going to be really thrilled to know that I did not write in this gorgeous, gorgeous edition of Pride and Prejudice. So I'm giving you a flip through of the book. So a lot of the tabs that you see on the side here are a lot of the quotes that I am loving and some of the descriptions that I'm finding to be really interesting. I'm not going to dive into the story of Pride and Prejudice too much with you for the reason that I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to be a spoiler. I really just want to talk to you about my experience of the book so far and maybe dive into some of the characters of Pride and Prejudice. So let's start talking about some of the characters within Pride and Prejudice. First, let's talk about the houses. You know, the house is just as much as a character as the characters themselves. Let's first take a visit to the Bennets' house. The Longbourn estate is the Bennets' home in the town of Hertfordshire. I probably said that wrong, but here we go. Hi, welcome to Longbourn. Come on in. And here we are going to meet the crazy, wacky, just nonsensical Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet, she's a little nutty. She's married to the sensible and funny Mr. Bennet. Say hello. Hi, Mr. Bennet. You know what? You need to stop talking and gossiping all the time. I don't know how to do that. Mrs. Bennet. Mr. Bennet. Now let's introduce you to the main characters of the book. Here we have Elizabeth. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am the new modern woman that is going to tell you all what I feel, whether you like to hear it or not. Here's Jane. Jane and Elizabeth are very close sisters. They love each other a lot. Polar opposites, but love each other dearly. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about their characters in just a minute, but I just want to introduce everybody. So say hello to Jane. Hi, Jane. And say hello to Elizabeth. Ooh, Elizabeth. She's the star of our Pride and Prejudice. Now let's say hello to Mr. Bingley. Mr. Bingley has just recently purchased Netherfield, another home that is in Hertfordshire. So the name of his estate is Netherfield, and Mr. Bingley has recently acquired this property, this estate, which makes him the most eligible bachelor in Hertfordshire. Everybody wants a piece of Mr. Bingley. This is Caroline. This is Mr. Bingley's sister. Caroline and Mr. Bingley. She is known in the book as Miss Bingley. They both live Netherfield. Eventually pops in a character by the name of Mr. Collins. He is the cousin of the Bennet girls. I won't get into too much detail about what role he plays, but I'm going to talk about more of his character. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm going to talk a lot and talk your ear off till you just can't stand me anymore. Mr. Darcy. This is Mr. Darcy. Now, I haven't got to the point where I have seen his estate, but I know his estate is Pemberley. I do know that. But I haven't gotten to the point to the book where I can show you a picture of Pemberley yet. We know that Mr. Darcy is rich. He is the friend of Mr. Bingley. And he has a lot of influence over Mr. Bingley, especially because, you know, Mr. Bingley's only worth £5,000 a year and Mr. Darcy is worth £10,000 a year. So that makes Mr. Darcy much more attractive than Mr. Bingley. Mr. Bingley really likes Jane a lot. In fact, so much so that Mrs. Bennet won't shut up about those two getting married. That's about all I'm going to tell you. There's another character in the book. His name is Officer Denny. And Officer Denny comes into the town, Meryton. And that's where a lot of the girls, particularly Kitty, Lydia, and Mary go. They like to go see their aunt, Mrs. Phillips, in Meryton. They like to go there a lot. And the reason why they like to go there a lot is because the officers tend to go into town there. So these are the three youngest sisters of Elizabeth and Jane. So the Bennets have 5 daughters. And all Mrs. Bennet wants to do is marry them off. See ya, see ya, see ya. Another character that we meet is Lady Catherine. Yeah, she, you know what, this really does represent her perfectly. Now, Mr. Collins and Lady Catherine are very much associated in the sense that he is a clergyman at the church that Lady Catherine, who is incredibly wealthy, in case you couldn't tell, and incredibly snobby and prejudiced, she actually is helping Mr. Collins. I don't know to what extent, but he is utterly obliged to Lady Catherine and speaks nothing but good things about her all the time. He brags and brags all the time about how wonderful Lady Catherine is. We soon find out differently. Lady Catherine has the estate of Rosings. Rosings' estate is absolutely gorgeous with all these beautiful gardens, as you can see. And you can see that the party is leading up to her home. So this is Lady Catherine's home, Rosings. Let's talk about Mr. Bennet. Now, Mr. Bennet is one of my favorite characters. I think he's incredibly funny. He has a great humor about him and his surroundings. To me, he's really wise and sharp in wit. He delights in silence in his library, which is a lot like Jane Austen's own father. If you watch Lucy Worsley's special about Jane Austen, you'll find out that he also had many daughters and often escaped to his library for quiet. Mr. Bennet is married to the worrywart Mrs. Bennet. Now, she is worrisome and weary with wondering and wondering and whining. That is what seems to make her very happy. But she is unhappy in her own anxiety put on only by herself. She is short in forgiveness and eager in false pridefulness. She delights in her own gossip, displaying grandeur exploits that are tiresome to everyone, including her own daughters. She gossips and gossips and talks, and she likes to make a scene at parties. This eventually will be the downfall of her daughters, their mother. Meet Jane. She's awesome. I love Jane very much. She is part of the central part of the story, and as I mentioned, she is very, very good friends with her sister, Elizabeth. But Elizabeth and Jane are two incredibly different people. Jane is wise and calm in her tenderness. She is thoughtful to a fault. She sees the value and virtue in just about everyone. She does not see the bad in anyone. And she really always tries to see the good in the world. And lots of times when gossip is going around, Jane doesn't really involve herself in the gossip. Now, to me, this story is a lot about gossip. Everyone talking about everything all the time and what everyone says. And as we know with gossip, things get a little out of control. And one person who is the biggest gossip of all is their mother. And Jane and Elizabeth are often mortified by their mother's behavior and how she is constantly interfering and intervening and disgracing her family by the way that she talks about other people. And so it really offends the girls, the daughters. A lot of problems that persist in the story are the doings of Mrs. Bennet and her gossip. But again, as I said, Jane, look at how pure and beautiful Jane looks. I love her. She really finds it impossible to be in disagreement towards anyone. So when Elizabeth wants to talk to her about any of the people or any of the things that she feels and thinks badly about other people, Jane will always say, well, I don't really see it that way. I don't really believe that that's how it's happening. She easily forgives, and she lives on the energy of hopes and happiness. Jane is really the epitome of hope. Elizabeth. Now, a lot of us are going to look at Elizabeth and think she is the modern woman. She was ahead of her time. And, you know, in a way she was. She spoke her mind. She really did not hold back. There were times where, boy, I'll tell you what, if I had been talked to by Lady Catherine the way that Elizabeth was, bam, 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 I hate you, go away. Seriously, I would have knocked Lady Catherine, boom, bye. But she does know restraint. She does know her place in society and as a woman, but she feels the angst of being a woman that always has to remain silent or at a particular level of obedience, so to speak. When we talk about the book Pride and Prejudice, one thing I have to say is that it sticks to its theme. There is a lot of pride and prejudice within this book and a lot of talk about pride and prejudice. And quite frankly, while Elizabeth seems to think that she's not very prideful, she is probably one of the most prideful characters that I find in the book. She's also very prejudiced, and she thinks that she is not prejudiced. She's one of the most prejudiced characters in the book. She's anxious to prey on gossip and tales and falls for them out of her lack of trust in humanity. She sees the bad in everyone except those who aren't. She is urgent to respond and react. Much like me. She must be a highly sensitive person. She is incredibly headstrong and a bit rash. She plays her beauty like a toy. She has no shame in standing her ground and speaking what's right and showing her real emotions, despite how other women were supposed to be acting in her time. She saw no value in pretending or holding back what she felt was right or wrong, whether it was right or wrong, Elizabeth. Her love for Jane is the only comfort that can cause her to quiet, but only for a time.
You really don't want to miss another episode of Open a Book, especially my next part of this series of the characteristics of the characters of Pride and Prejudice. Make sure to click subscribe and get notified of when the next video comes out. Next time, we'll be talking about that notorious Mr. Darcy and that authoritative, bossy Lady Catherine, the charming Mr. Wickham, and that annoying Mr. Collins, along with the scandalous Caroline Bingley, and the youngest of the sisters, Kitty, Lydia, and Mary. Please also remember to share this video. I'm hoping to get more subscribers, so anything that you can do to help would be great. Click subscribe and share on your other social media platforms. Please also click like. But remember, I don't like haters here.